Record. Okay, so what we're going to focus on today is a talk by the Rebbe about a specific verse in this parsha, in this portion. But what's interesting is that it gets into the broader discussion of how rabbis interpret the verses. And specifically, we're going to refer to two rabbis, Rav and Shmuel, that are quoted in various places in the Medrash, and Rashi quotes some of them. And what we're going to try to do is do something that the Rebbe really liked to do, and that is show that when there are multiple disagreements, there is a consistent thread and a consistent theme between the opinions of every specific rabbi. In other words, it's not many random disagreements, but there's one argument, one common denominator to all the opinions of, in our case, Rav, and a different common denominator between all the disagreements of Shmuel. And so in that sense, we get the picture by seeing various arguments which seem unrelated. Then we look at what they call the common denominator between all the opinions of that specific rabbi, and then we get to a deeper understanding and deeper reasoning of what they're saying and why they're saying it. And we did this sometimes with the law. There's some of the Rebbe's comments about the law are a little bit more famous, but this is not so much a law, but interpretation of the Bible, of the biblical story. So that is what we're setting out to do. It's a little bit, there's a lot of moving parts in this talk. We'll read some of it inside because we have it in English. There are a lot of disagreements that we're going to bring, but hopefully we'll be able to keep some sense of clarity. And again, what we're looking for is the common theme. So that common theme is going to be reiterated, hopefully, and hopefully by the time we're done, reinforced. So where do we start from? We'll start from the first instance that we're going to quote, and that is from this week's parsha. So this week's portion, we begin to read about the slavery in Egypt. So I open up the first page, Exodus chapter 1. See it on the screen, Exodus chapter 1. And the Torah mentions the people who descended to Egypt, 70 people. We're going back really to the end of Genesis, to two portions ago, but it's sort of retelling. And then you read verse 6. Now Joseph died, as well as all his brothers and all that generation. Verse 7, the children of Israel were fruitful and swarmed and increased and became very, very strong. And the land became filled with them. Okay, so now we know that they multiplied. Now we have an interesting verse. And this is a verse which tells a little bit, but actually is actually raises more questions than answers. Verse 8, now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know about Joseph. This is the verse we're going to focus on. So we have a new king. We have a new Pharaoh. This new Pharaoh did not know about Joseph. Now, he said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we. And basically, long story short, we know what happens. He's afraid of the outsiders, of the Jews. So he says we have to worry about them. We have to keep them under watch. And eventually that leads to the slavery. Okay, wonderful story. The question is, what do you do with verse 8? There's a new king that arose. They did not know Joseph. So the question becomes, what does it mean the king did not know Joseph? I mean, Joseph is probably, other than Pharaoh, the most famous figure in Egypt, right? The entire region came to Joseph for many years, at least, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, at least 9 years, depending on how you read the story, if the famine lasted for 7 years, 2 years or 7 years, but everybody had to come to Joseph to buy bread. Joseph is the one who saved the economy of Egypt. And you're telling me that a little while later, there was a king who did not know Joseph. That's hard to understand. So that's what we have to deal with. So what are we going to do? We're going to open Rashi and see what's really happening here. And as usual, not as usual, but as sometimes happens, in Rashi, there are two opinions. So here we go. Show Rashi's commentary. A new king arose. So Rashi says, quotes it from the Talmud. From the Talmud and from the Medrash. There is a controversy between Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel are one of the famous sages of the Talmud. They were the first generation of rabbis at after the conclusion of the Mishnah. So they're the first generation of the rabbis who interpret the Mishnah, the rabbis of the Talmud. So Rav and Shmuel, one says he was really new. In Hebrew, Chadash Mamash. Yeah, he was actually a new king. And the other one says his decrees were new. In other words, the verse says it's a new king, but you'll see in a minute that you'll see why. But right away, Rav says, no. New king doesn't mean new king. I'm sorry, what am I saying? Rav says a new king means a new king. The second person is actually more surprising. Shmuel says it's not a new king. It says a new king, but it's not a new king. What does it mean, a new king? It means his decrees were new. Same guy, and the same guy decides to make a new decree, new decrees. So in other words, new decrees is almost like, so his rulership is new, his kingship is new. What is a king? A king expresses itself in how he rules. So a new king really means it's a new policy. New policy with shifting policies, that's a new king. That is what Rashi says. Now, the bracket is not in Rashi. I'm saying what follows now is not from Rashi, it's from the Talmud, but we'll read it. Why not? We'll read it, because it's also the Rebbe also quotes it, we'll read it. From Sota and Exodus Rabbah, but that's in Talmud and the Medrash. Now, before we even go anywhere, why would you say that it's not a new king? The verse says a new king. Why would you say it's not a new king? Shmuel has a lot of explaining to do, right? The first opinion says it's a new king. A new king is a new king. Wonderful. The second guy says, no, it's not a new king. It says a new king, but it's not a new king. What is new king at the verse says? Oh, it means that it's a new ray of new policies, new decrees. But how does he get that? Why does he say it? And what's the scriptural source for that? So here, the Rashi doesn't say it on the Bible, but the Talmud, but here in the bracket, they're quoting from the Talmud. Since the Torah does not say the king of Egypt died and a new king arose, it implies that the old king was still alive, only that his policies have changed, and he acted like a new king. That comes from Rashi on Sota 11a. Okay, so we have a problem. The first guy says it's a new king. Wonderful, it's a new king. That's no problem. But the second guy, Shmuel says, you can't say it's a new king. Why? Because what happened to the old king? It doesn't say the old king died. It doesn't say a new king was appointed. By the way, later in the Torah, later in this parsha, it does say Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, died. And it's not clear if it means literally or he became struck with leprosy. But the bottom line is later on the Torah says Pharaoh died. Here it doesn't say Pharaoh died. So it just says there's a new king. So Shmuel argues, 1 minute. If it doesn't say a new king, if it doesn't say he died and a new king was appointed, if it doesn't say the old one died, why is a new king appointed? So Shmuel says, we have no choice. It's the same king because the old one didn't die. So what's the meaning of it's a new king? Oh, new king means new decrees, new policies. So that hopefully explains a little bit of why Shmuel is bothered, why he's perturbed, why he says that you can't just read it literally that it's a new king, because if it's a new king, why doesn't it say the old one died? That's Samuel's argument. Okay, we'll dissect this, so don't worry about it. If you have any questions, hang on to it at least another few seconds. The problem, and now we continue, who did not know about Joseph. That's the second clause of the verse. A new king arose on Egypt, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know about Joseph. Okay, so according to Rav, a new king arose, he did not know Joseph. But according to Shmuel, the second opinion, it's not a new king, it's the same king who Joseph helped. So what does it mean he did not know Joseph? How could you say the king did not know Joseph? Well, you could say he became senile. No. So Rashi says, who did not know means that he acted as if he did not know about him. So that's how we solve the problem. It says he didn't know about it says he didn't know Joseph, but we're gonna interpret it to mean it doesn't mean he didn't know. It's impossible. According to Samuel, according to Shmuel, the second opinion, if this is indeed the same king, he obviously knew about Joseph. But the meaning of he did not know about Joseph, just like we say when we say he's a new king, we mean not literally. He wasn't a new king. It means he made new decrees. So when the verse says he didn't know Joseph, it doesn't mean literally he didn't know Joseph. It means he did not know he made believe he didn't know who Joseph was. So that is the verse, and that is the Rashi. Okay, everything is fine, everything is simple. Not everything is simple, of course. If I ask you between these two people, obvious question, which one do you think, which interpretation is more straightforward? Which interpretation is more consistent with the simple reading of the verse? Right? We have two interpretations. One is that it's a new king, and one is that it's not a new king, but he just has new decrees. And one is he didn't know Joseph. The second opinion seems to have to say he made like he didn't know Joseph. So it's pretty clear that the first opinion is straightforward. New king is new king. That's wonderful. The second opinion is less straightforward. It's not pshat. It's not the simple meaning. Because he has to say that it's non-literal. New king doesn't mean new king. New king means old king, but new decrees. So now what the problem is, that the problem that we're addressing is, there are many problems. The problem we're addressing is, you're Rashi. Let's say you're Rashi. Rashi writes in his commentary multiple times that his job is to interpret only the simple interpretation. There are many other interpretations. Go find the Medrash. Rashi is not a digest of all the commentaries or all the rabbinic statements. Rashi's job, he says it himself, is I'm here to tell you the straightforward reading of the verse. Sometimes there is no straightforward reading of the verse, so he has to bring two interpretations because no one interpretation is perfect. So he brings a second one. But over here, he brings two opinions. Why does he bring two opinions? The first one is straightforward, the second one is not. So why is he bringing the opinion that's not straightforward? If he himself says, my job is to bring the straightforward opinion. So that's the question that we're going to begin with. And what that's going to lead to is, no, both Rav and Shmuel, both are looking for the straightforward opinion, but they have two ways of interpreting what the straightforward opinion is. And that's what we're trying to get to. How does Rav, when Rav has, what's Rav's consistent opinion about interpreting verses? And what's Shmuel, who seems over here to be less literal, Shmuel has a totally different way of interpreting verses. Both are legitimate, both are interesting. So that is, by way of introduction, I guess not just introduction, that's getting us into the subject, that's getting us into the discussion, and I think we're ready to begin. ready to fasten the seatbelts. But in the meantime, as usual, any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to share. Okay, so let's look a little bit at, the Rebbe's talk here, and I'm just trying to figure out where we should start from because it's long and one.
Can you share the link, please?
Yes. How do I share the link? Here it is. Chat. Okay, I think that's the link.
Thank you.
Strange link, but I think that's it. Yeah. Yeah. By storage. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go to section 2 because it looks like it's less it goes to the core issue. And once we get to the core issue, we can start discussing the details. Okay, let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay. Okay, let's read. Why not? On this basis, we can understand why Rashi notes the names of the sages who disseminated these interpretations, Rav and Shmuel, as knowing their identities help us understand their fundamental disagreements. For as explained many times, Rashi notes a sage's name only when this information will help to solve a difficulty with Rashi's commentary that a studious student is likely to raise. So this is a very interesting point. Let me just give you a minute or two of background. In 1964, the Rebbe's mother passed away. Her name was Chana. When she passed away, a few weeks after she passed away, the Rebbe started a new custom, and that is in her memory, every time he taught Torah on Shabbat, he also focused on teaching Rashi, focusing on Rashi's commentary. And over the years, the Rebbe really put out a new way of studying Rashi. Like, what are the rules of studying Rashi? What are the rules that Rashi uses for his interpretation? And this is for 25 years of explaining Rashi, put forth many new ideas of how to study Rashi. Some of those, all those laws, all those rules and ideas were collected and what's the word I'm looking for? Categorized as the rules of Rashi. Now, a lot of them were not stated earlier. A lot of them were the Rebbe's innovations, that saying this is how Rashi analyzed the verse. One of the observations that the Rebbe made, which is an obvious observation, but the Rebbe's interpretation was interesting, is that if you look, every single comment of Rashi really comes from a previous source, either the Talmud or the Medrash. And almost always there's a name of a sage attributed who said this point. Yet Rashi only quotes the names of the commentators, of the sages who offer the commentary, only quotes the names in certain places. Majority of the times, Rashi does not quote the name. He just quotes the interpretation. There are some cases, I don't know what the percentage is, 20%, 10%, 15%, I'm not sure exactly, but there's a small percentage of the time where Rashi actually quotes the name. So the premise the Rebbe says is Rashi. Why doesn't Rashi quote the name always? Either always or never. So the premise is that Rashi is not going to quote the name unless the name of the sage will actually offer insight and help you understand the interpretation. So in this case, this is case in point, and this is something like I think is a new idea. I don't think anyone ever said it before the Rebbe. But if Rashi is quoting Rav and Shmuel, it's because we have to understand Rav's philosophy and Shmuel's philosophy to be able to understand their interpretation in this case. So now Rashi is signaling to us, if you want to really understand what's happening here, you have to analyze what's Rav's philosophy of interpretation and what's Shmuel's philosophy of interpretation. Otherwise, why would Rashi quote the names? There's no reason to quote the names because most of the times he does not quote the names. So that is the premise that the Rebbe is addressing here, and this is going to broaden the discussion to many other interpretations of Rav and Shmuel, many other disagreements. When we examine, I'm skipping the next bracket, when we examine a number of disputes in the Talmud between Rav and Shmuel, concerning their respective interpretations of biblical verses, particularly when these disputes are presented in the format of one opinion asserts and the other asserts. That's the language that the Talmud uses. Rashi quotes it. Two people, one asserts and the other asserts. The distinctive approaches of Rav Shmuel to biblical exegesis are discernible. Okay, and here is the big idea. So you got to pay attention here because this is the part you want to get. And from here, we're going to apply this everywhere. Rav gives priority to the word or words of a verse, even when doing so leaves the subject matter unclear. Shmuel, in contrast, gives priority to the subject matter as conveyed by a passage, even when doing so leaves the meaning of one or more words unclear. Okay, and we're going to bring many examples for this, but what are we saying here? We're saying it like this. You have a choice. You have a word, but the word is in the context. Now you have two options how to interpret the word. And you want to do what Rashi says. You want the simple, straightforward interpretation. Go ahead. So you want to pick this simple, straightforward interpretation. Question is, what is the simple interpretation? Interpretation of what? Are you looking at what is the meaning of this word and focusing only on the word, and finding the better interpretation of this word, even though that would leave you a question in the general context of the story? Or do you prefer to find an interpretation that fits the general context of the story, even if it doesn't apply so neatly to this word? That's the big distinction here. The big distinction here, are you looking at the word? Are you looking at the context? All right, we're all starting from the same premise. We want to find the most straightforward interpretation of the verse. The question is, what if there's as you will see, sometimes there's a conflict between what the word is telling you, but if you take the simple interpretation of the word, you may be missing, you may have a question from the general context, or you can have an interpretation which explains and fits the general context, but it doesn't fit so neatly into this word. And what are you going to do then? So which one do you choose? So the big idea here is, consistently, Rav would say, when I interpret a verse, I look at the word. If that leads to a question about the context, we'll deal with it. But I want to focus on the word. I want the interpretation that explains this word in the most simple sense. Shmuel says, I'm less interested in the word. I want an interpretation that explains the context. And even if it doesn't fit so smoothly with the word, that I'm willing to pay that price, because I want an interpretation that makes the context work. So now we're going to have to re-examine and see how there's actually two ways of interpreting what is the most simple interpretation. What is the most straightforward interpretation? Is it the word or is it the context? And now we can go through some of the new arguments. We'll also go back to the old one to show how that works. And we'll go back first. Why don't we go back and try to do this ourselves, and then we'll look at the new arguments. But in the meantime, like I said, I hope everything is clear. Don't hesitate to jump in. Okay, so let's try to apply the Rebbe's logic to the previous Rashi. To the previous Rashi that we already studied. I think the talk will do it, but let's try it ourselves. So a new king arose. There's controversy between Rav and Shmuel. One says he was really new. That's Rav. Rav says new is new. What are you going to do? You want to take a word that you want to explain the word new. So new is new. Don't tell me new is like he had new decrees. That's not straightforward. New is new. Shmuel says he wasn't new. He was Shmuel, and the other one says Shmuel says his decrees were new. He wasn't really new. So obviously, Shmuel's interpretation is more difficult in the word. But here, as we saw in the bracket, what is propelling Shmuel to say that it wasn't new? Because he looks at the context of the story. And like you see here in the comment quoting from Rashi and the Talmud, since the Torah does not say the king of Egypt died and the new king arose, it implies that the old king was still alive. So that's a question about the context of the verse, not the word itself. And therefore, Shmuel says, I want an interpretation which is consistent with the context of the word, even though it's not as smoothly, doesn't fit as smoothly with the word itself. And now we're going to bring many other examples, all interesting. So here we go. A few examples of their divergent styles. On the verse concerning Joseph, he came to the house to do his work. The Talmud says, Rav and Shmuel argue. One said, okay, what's the context? The context is that Joseph is sold to Egypt as a slave. And then when he's sold to Egypt as a slave, what happens then is his master puts him in charge of his home, and he becomes in charge of his master's home. At some point, the Torah says that the wife of his master decides that she wants to seduce Joseph because he was good looking. And she basically would try to seduce him for a long time. And eventually happened one day that Joseph comes home to do his work. That's what the verse says. The Medrash explains that nobody else was home because it was a holiday and everyone went to worship, and Joseph was home. I'm sorry, the mistress says she is not feeling well, so she wants to stay home. And then the verse says that Joseph comes home to do his work. And then she tries to seduce him. And then the story is that he runs away from her. She grabs him. He runs away from her. His garment is left in her hand. Then when her husband comes home, she accuses Joseph of trying to rape her. Joseph is then put in prison. Okay, that's the story. But we have an innocent verse. Joseph came home to do his work. What could be more innocent than that? And now here we have also a disagreement between Rav and Shmuel, where Rav would say he came to his house to do his work. A Talmud says Rav and Shmuel. One said his actual work. What does work mean? Work means work. Work means he came to work. Shmuel said, and the other said, which is Shmuel, he entered to take care of his needs with her. In other words, he was coming to sin. Work is not literal. The work is a euphemism. And that's the disagreement. Okay. Now, which one is the more straightforward interpretation? So what do you do? Why are they disagreeing? Just tell me which one is more straightforward. What do you think? Is work work, or is work to sin? So the question is, what are you looking at? Are you looking at the word? You're looking at the context of the story. The first opinion maintains his actual work, as that this is what the words in the verse denote. The verse says work, so work means work. We got to stay simple. But from the continuation of the verse, and none of the people of the house were there in the house, right? So it says, oh, by the way, they're alone. It appears that scripture is amplifying for us that what sort of work is meant here, the sort of work that requires none of the people. In other words, the verse says he comes to do work and nobody is home. What type of work? Type of work that you want no one to be home, where you want privacy. So that's to sin with her. So that's why Shmuel says, don't get caught up by the actual word. You have to look at the context. That's why the second opinion argues and says to take care of his needs. For otherwise, Joseph would not have entered the house specifically when no one else was there, given that the master's wife had already urged him to lie with me, right? We know there was a history, just that she spoke to him many days. She was always trying to get him to lie with her. So why would he come home if no one's home? He's not stupid. He knows that if he comes home when no one's home, he's vulnerable. So Shmuel says the fact that he comes home when no one else is home is indicative that he's trying to come to sin, and therefore the verse coming to do work doesn't mean work. It means to take care of his needs with her, which is the quote, which means to sin. And again, even though it doesn't fit in the word, but Shmuel says you have to look at the context. And that she spoke, okay. Thus, from the context, it is understood that he entered to take care of his needs with her. So that's a beautiful interpretation, because what's happening now is we're doing a few things. First of all, we're connecting Rav's interpretation, we're making Rav's interpretation consistent and Shmuel's interpretation consistent. We're saying that they have a consistent view. One looks at the word, one looks at the context. And what we're also saying is explaining Samuel, when you first read, I'm sure that when you first read that the verse says new, and the second opinion, Shmuel, says, no, it's not new. It's an old king with new decrees. You say, why are you going there? Why are you saying that? Why are you why are you reading the verse in an unnatural way? The word says new. What's driving you to push you to say that it's not new? So according to this interpretation, we know why you're doing that, why Shmuel is doing that. Because Shmuel says, I also am looking for the simple interpretation of the verse, but I'm not looking at at one specific word. I look at the context. And the context would lead me to say that the word is non-literal. And if you want to go all day, we have more examples to make this point. So we only do two. We have to do at least a third one. Otherwise, you're going to say just two is a mistake. Once you have three, you're going to say that's consistent already. Okay, the question is what other interpretations we should look at? Okay, let's go to section 5. This is another verse in the Torah. The other verses are all in the Torah. Okay, but this is a famous disagreement. Okay, here we go. We're going to look at one more disagreement between Rav and Shmuel, and then we're again, Rav looks at the word, Shmuel looks at the context, and then we will see what we want to do after that. So you have, going back to the story of Abraham, Abraham's wife Sarah dies. He looks for a burial spot. So he speaks to the people of Chet, and he says, they say, you can bury your wife wherever you want, that will give you the best land. And he says, can we speak to Ephron? Let him give me Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the double cave. Okay, very simple, double cave. What's a double cave? A double cave is a double cave. What's a double cave? We don't know, so we have to look at this, a disagreement, what a double cave means. Machpelah, double cave. Rav and Shmuel argue. One says, two horizontal chambers, the outside one leading to the other one, to the outside one leading to the inside one. What is double? What's a double cave? So there's two rooms. There's an inner room, there's an outer room, and an inner room. That's the double cave. So it's two chambers, the outside one leading to the inside one. That's one opinion. The other said a chamber and another one above it. So it's two stories, one on top of the other. So double could either mean one within the other. You go into one room and that leads to another room. That's a double cave. Or a double cave would mean there's one chamber and then another chamber on top of it. So those are the two opinions. Now we want to analyze it. Now, according to the opinion that there was one chamber on top of the other, the term machpelah fits in because there were two ceilings. But according to the view that there were two chambers, the outside one leading to the inside one, in what sense was the cave doubled? It was doubled in the sense of four couples who would be buried there. So this is all, again, I made a mistake. This is all part of the second opinion, the Shmuel's opinion. The second opinion clarifies. So what does double mean? Double means there's two caves, one on top of the other. That's Rav's opinion. I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. One said two horizontal chambers, the outside one leading to the inside one. The other says a chamber and another one above over it. Now, according to the opinion that there was one chamber on top of the other, the term machpelah fits in. Oh, everything is backward here. Okay, so the premise here is that if you have one on top of the other, you could say double. But if you have one cave, just two rooms, that's not a double cave. It's just two rooms in one cave. So according to the person who says that is one within the other, not one on top of the other. So what does double mean? So here that opinion explains that it's called the double cave because the cave was designed to have couples. Kfula bezuka, it has multiple couples. In other words, back in the day, they would bury in caves instead of in the earth. And this cave was designed that you can have a burial spot, and the burial spot was arranged that you can have couples buried there. That's double. Double doesn't mean the cave is double. Double means that the burial spots are doubled. And we know there were four couples buried there. So that's the two opinions. Now, how does this help us, the word or the context? What's going on here? So let's see if we can analyze this. I'm afraid I may get a little confused, so bear with me a little bit. Here we go. Here too, Rav and Shmuel offer interpretations that are consistent with their respective viewpoints. The simple meaning of a term machpelah cave, a single cave containing something doubled, fits in better with the interpretation that the cave was doubled with couples, double burial places, than with the interpretation that the cave consisted of a chamber and another one above it, especially since when speaking of two subterranean chambers, one over the other, the upper one is not higher in the same way as the upper story of a standing structure is. Therefore, one opinion says two chambers, the outside one leading to the inside one, and that it was doubled in the sense of couples who would be buried there. Okay, what's the problem here? If you have two caves, one on top of the other, then essentially they're two separate caves. It's not a double cave. They're two separate caves. Why is it double? right? A building, if you have a building that there are 2 stories, that is 2 stories, you could say it's a double building. Why? Because the higher one, the higher structure, the second floor needs the first floor to hold it up, right? Because there would be no second floor without a first floor. But if you're talking about a cave, if you have one cave, one hole in a mountain, and then another hole in the mountain on top of it, it's not double. It's 2 separate ones. It's not a double. Double means that the thing itself is doubled. So how would you explain double? According to the opinion, to the simple opinion of the word, double means that this cave itself is doubled. What does that mean? It means that there are that there are couples buried there. So that's Rav. Rav says double cave does not mean one on top of the other. One on top of the other is not really double. Double cave means that there are multiple ways of double cave means that you can bury multiple people here. Multiple couples, that is. That's in that sense, it's doubled. And that's the word. So he's focusing on the word double. What is Shmuel, what we're going to do? But now let's consider the context. But when we consider the context of the verses, such an interpretation, 2 chambers, the outside one leading to the inside one, that it was doubled in couples is difficult. Abraham's words in which he referred to the plot of land and wanted the Machpelah cave were said as part of the favor he was asking, and prostrated himself to the people of the land. And he spoke, if it is your will. And what was he asking? That I bury my dead singular from before me in order to ease his grief. So does it make sense to explain that when Abraham asked, give me the Machpelah cave, that he was asking for land sufficient for 8 burial places, ? In other words, like this, let's look at the context of the verse. If you look at the context of the verse, what Abraham is looking for, he's looking to play down his request. He says, what's the big deal? I just want a little cave at the end of the field. I have a dead person. I have to get rid of my dead wife. I'm looking for a burial spot in the singular. Abraham is trying to downplay his request. That's the context of the negotiation. So it wouldn't make sense that Abraham would identify this cave. He would just say, oh, the cave. Identify it as, I want the double cave. What is double cave? It's not a double cave. He would say, oh no, I mean the cave that you can bury multiple couples. Oh, you're the stranger. You're coming into town. You want multiple burial spots. You don't just want one for your wife. Oh, now all the neighbors get nervous. You know what happens. The Jew moves into town. If you want a little place, we'll give it to you. But you want multiple places? Oh no, all the neighbors are going to get nervous. Okay, so it didn't start today. It started back in the days of Abraham. So therefore, Shmuel says, if you're going to look at the context of the verse, you cannot say that double means double couples. And therefore, Shmuel says, we're going to say double means a cave and another cave on top of it, even though it's difficult to call that double because it's not really a double cave, it's 2 separate caves. But Shmuel would rather interpret the word in a way that the word itself is a little bit problematic, then interpret the word in a way that the word itself is smooth, but the overall context of the verse creates a question. So that is the first part of the talk. We could stop here. There's more examples. We could stop here. But maybe we should do one more thing. Or maybe we'll try one more thing, one more point here at the end. Also related to Rav and Shmuel, but let's just summarize what we did till now, because this is an interesting idea. And what we're saying here is that anytime you see a disagreement between Rav and Shmuel, there's other disagreements, as we will see later in the talk if we have time. But anytime you see a disagreement about the interpretation of a verse, what is the meaning of a verse? Not what the meaning of the law is. They argue about law in many, many cases, but we're not focusing on law now. We're looking at the verse. How do you interpret this verse? So you will see a consistent thread, and that is Rav consistently will look to explain the word in the simplest way, simplest, most straightforward meaning of the word. And therefore, new is new. And therefore, what was the other example we learned? The new king. And we also learned the example of, when it says Joseph comes home to do work, it means to do work. Don't tell me stories about he came to sin. It means he came to do work. And double cave is not 2 caves. 2 caves is not a double cave. Double cave means a cave that is doubled, a cave that has multiple burial spots, multiple couples. He's always looking to explain the word in the simplest context of the word. Shmuel, who was his colleague, and they had colleagues, they spoke to each other. They actually had different yeshivas. One was in the Babylonian city of Sura, one was in the Babylonian city of Pumbedita. So they were colleagues, they were contemporaries, but they disagreed all the time. And Shmuel says, no, Rav, I agree with you that you have to look for the simple, straightforward meaning. But don't get distracted by the meaning of a word. You have to always bear in mind how that word affects the context. And in the context, sometimes if you translate the word literally, you're ignoring the broader message of the context. And let's go to the three agreements, the three examples. A new king. If it means new, you have a question. How come the verse doesn't say the old one died? Okay, you can answer that question, but it's still a question. So Shmuel says, I'd rather think about the context of the verse, of the context, and therefore say new does not mean new. It's the same king. And then we get to the point where the second disagreement, Joseph comes home to do his work. Rav says work is work. Shmuel says, no, work is not work. You have to look at the context. What is the context? Nobody else is home. So why is Joseph coming if no one else is home? If he already has the history of the wife, Potiphar's wife, trying to seduce him. So no, you're looking at the context. Now you see that the word for work doesn't mean work literally. It means a euphemism for sin. Because he wants to look not at the word, but at the context of the verse. And then finally, the third example that we brought, the example of the cave of Machpelah, the double cave. Rav says double cave cannot mean two caves, two separate caves, one on top of the other. They're not related. It's not like two stories of a house. That's two caves. It's not a double cave. A double cave means the cave itself is doubled. It has multiple couples. Shmuel says, what are you talking about? Abraham would not get up in a negotiation, okay? That's, by the way, what happened. Abraham comes to the zoning meeting. That's exactly what happened. All the people of Chet had to be there. Why couldn't you go and buy the land from Ephron? No, it was a zoning question. All the people of Chet, or that entire town, had to agree that we're allowing this foreigner to come into town. So when you come to the zoning meeting, you're not going to highlight that, oh, I want 8 caves just for my wife. You say, I want a little cave. I want a cave. Name the cave. Don't highlight. Don't flaunt that you want double couples. Why is he doing that? So Shmuel says, so that cannot mean the meaning of double. And double simply means is one on top of the other. So here is we find a consistent thread. And again, when you read a verse and you see the verse and you say, how could the rabbi say that new doesn't mean new? Oh, so not that the rabbi doesn't care about the simple meaning. Not that Shmuel doesn't care about the simple meaning. It's that Shmuel is looking for the simple meaning, not of the verse, but of the context. So I think that was very interesting of how you look at consistency within each opinion, but also it broadens our opinion of what our definition of what does the simple meaning mean. Is it the simple meaning of the word or the context? And there are two views, both legitimate. So this is one idea. This is one big idea. Now, if you don't, okay, the question is if we should jump in for the next idea for the next 10 minutes. That's the question. Okay, I think we'll stop here because the next thing is going to take us more than 10 minutes. So I think we have something complete. So thank you for joining. Next year, God willing, we'll finish the second part. But again, I hope this was interesting and I enjoyed it. So thank you for joining. Wonderful day. We should meet in good health and enjoy the beautiful day. It looks like the sun came out, so that's good.
Thanks, Rabbi. Toda.
Have a wonderful day.